I am neither demure nor mindful, and none of the women in any of these books are either. Hey, I'm Jordan. I talk about books and life, but mostly books, and today I'm hopping on the very demure, very mindful trend as it relates to book recommendations. So if you're not familiar with the trend, there's a woman on TikTok named Jules LeBron. She started a trend, a series on her TikTok about how to show up to work being very demure and very mindful. So in other words, dressing somewhat modestly, having, more neutral makeup, basically as a woman going to work and appearing the same way that you did in your interview, such that you're not immediately kind of rocking the boat when you get there. And so initially when I was thinking about this video, I was going to try to find books to recommend that featured demure and mindful women, but it turns out that I just don't own any of those. So instead, I thought it would be fun to choose women who were in positions where they were expected to be demure and mindful, to adhere to very patriarchal systems and be the perfect wife or the perfect woman, and who decided to totally throw that out the window for a variety of reasons. If there are books that you love that you think fit this theme, I would love to hear about them in the comments, but otherwise let's get into the recommendations. So my first one is a book called Bloodmarked. This is a series, it's the first book in a trilogy, about a woman named Bree whose mother has recently died under mysterious circumstances. And Bree finds out that her mom is tied to the secret society on the college campus that her mother and her now attend. As someone who went to a school that had secret societies, they tend to be very white and privileged, and this one is no different. She decides to join in order to see whether or not she can figure out how her mom died, and in the process finds out that the members of this secret society are descendants of King Arthur's Knights of the Round Table and have associated powers and enhancements that come with that, and that she has powers too. And that's where I think the whole demure and mindful thing comes in, because I think that initially she definitely, both in college and in this secret society, tries to keep a low profile. She tries to follow the rules, tries to fit in and not rock the boat. When it comes to college, by joining the secret society, she kind of throws that out the window unintentionally. But when it comes to the secret society, she ends up more intentionally throwing that out the window and deciding to rock the boat when it becomes clear that following the rules is not really going to get her the information that she wants. More broadly, and this is something that I love about this book in general, she is a Black woman, and that is interwoven into the plot for a variety of reasons. It's actually one of the big threads in the book for reasons that I won't get into because spoilers. But there are many moments that I think that Black women who exist in predominantly white spaces or spaces like these secret societies would definitely relate to. One of my pet peeves when it comes to authors writing books about anyone with curly hair, but particularly Black women, is that they often do the whole thing of he ran his fingers through her hair, and that's not, I cannot run my fingers through my hair. Maybe when it's wet and I'm detangling it, but that's about it. I can't do it now. Even if it were straight, that would still not be a great idea. I probably could, but it would totally mess up the hairstyle. And that's explicitly called out at multiple instances in this book. There is a love interest that she has who I think attempts to do that briefly, and she's basically yeah, that's not gonna work, try again. Other things that come up are that as they're going on these missions, they often end up in the woods, camping kind of trips for multiple days. And there are times when they're finally able to, rest somewhere that has, water, it's an actual building where they can stay, where she has 3-hour wash days. She's in there, she's getting her hair clean, she's detangling everything, she's putting in all the hair products that we use, and then she's getting braids or cornrows. And then later on, of course, she will go to some society meeting, and one of the old white guys will be like, that hair isn't, appropriate for people in this space. And she basically tells him where he can put that opinion. So I love this book. I highly recommend it if you're into kind of sci-fi fantasy. I think it might technically be YA, but I think I'm 28 and I still loved it, so I would check it out. The second book is Vengeful by V.E. Schwab. This is also the second book in a trilogy, the Villains trilogy. In both this case and the last case, the third book has not come out. The entire series is about two men who were friends in college. Their names are Victor and Eli. They essentially figure out one day for a class project how to give each other superpowers, which I wish I had those kinds of class projects in school, although maybe not, because the process of doing so requires you to die and then be brought back to life. And because they get caught running this experiment, Victor goes to prison for several years, and Eli decides to crusade against the existence of extraordinaries, or EOs, which is what people with these powers are called, and eradicate them from the planet. Once Victor is out of jail, he also ends up going on a crusade against Eli, because Eli is basically the reason why he went to jail in the first place. Importantly, neither of these people are heroes. They're both villains, kind of in opposite directions. Eli is committed to wiping out all of the EOs and doesn't really care about the collateral damage that comes from that. And Victor is also committed to wiping out Eli and also doesn't really care about the collateral damage that comes from that. So they're both kind of on vengeance arcs in a lot of ways. But let's not talk about the boys, because the main character of the second book is Marcella Riggins. She is the former wife of a gangster mob boss, and as his wife, she's very much expected to be this mob boss wife, you know, powerful appearing figure, but ultimately often arm candy. She's supposed to make sure that his clothes are prepared for when he needs to go places, that food is on the table for dinner when he gets home, etc., etc. And she hates being in this position. So she figures out how to turn herself into an EO because she has died and come back to life. She is no longer his wife because he thinks that she is dead. And she decides to start her campaign of vengeance against her ex-husband. I include her in this category because she very much goes from very mindful, very demure to not at all mindful, not at all demure. Her powers when she comes back to life are that anyone that she touches basically disintegrates. So it's like a combination of like the Midas touch and like the Thanos snap, where anything she touches doesn't turn to gold, it just like erodes, which is very fun. I really like this book. I might actually like this book better than the first book, but either way, I'd highly recommend checking out the series. The one content warning I will give is that if you're not into some amount of gore and some amount of body horror, I wouldn't recommend this one because it can get a little bit graphic. The third book on this list is The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin. This is another trilogy that I also love, also written by a Black author, and it is a science fiction. It's actually a little more traditional science fiction, very world building heavy. It is about a woman named Essen. She lives in a small town with her husband and her 2 children. It's pretty clear from the get-go that this town is somewhat patriarchal. She's very much in charge of taking care of the children, gathering supplies and food, doing some amount of teaching, whereas the men are kind of the leaders of the town and of the society. One day she comes home and finds out that her husband has killed her son and has kidnapped her daughter. And so she goes on basically this quest, is what you'd call it in traditional science fiction, but she goes after to hunt down her husband in order to save her daughter. At the same time, the world is kind of falling apart around them. And when I say that, I don't mean like their local world, I mean like the planet. And when I say falling apart, I don't mean like at a societal level, that's also true, but like physically, like geology, like breaking into pieces. So she, while trying to go save her daughter, has to navigate this crumbling world where people also have powers and kind of come into her own in that way. And of course, the way that she does it is not very mindful or not very demure. She is very much willing to burn the entire planet down if it means that she gets her daughter back, which, like, same. And so that's why I think she fits into this, like, not very mindful, not very demure category. And I also think that it totally makes sense that she would. It's almost less of a explicit decision on her part to switch into this theme and more of a thing that I think just anyone would do in this scenario. Our fourth book is A Restless Truth, and I keep picking books that are the second book in a trilogy for whatever reason, but this is the second book in a trilogy. Our main character is Maud. She is the sister of the main character from the first book. The setting of the book is kind of Victorian steampunk, so it's definitely very patriarchal. Women kind of keep the home. They do not go to school. If they have jobs, they are secretaries. And Maud, I think, is someone who I wouldn't totally describe as mindful and demure. I think she comes across that way to other people, but she wants to go to college. She wants to do things that would not fit into a mindful and demure woman in this society. I just think that she's not very outspoken about it. So for this book, she is journeying to another continent on a boat. She is accompanying an older woman who needs a chaperone, And she's doing it as part of kind of this larger quest that ends up being the plot of the book, which I'm not going to get into because I don't know how to do that without spoiling it. In the process, she meets a woman named Violet, and Violet is the definition of not mindful and not demure. She is loud, she is outrageous, she is an actress. She actively flouts any norms around who women should be and what they should do and what they should look like. Now, this book is effectively a murder on the Orient Express. Someone has died, you need to figure out who killed them. In this case, you also need to figure out who has the object that they were carrying, because it is a very important magical object that is part of this larger quest. So Maud and Violet end up getting implicated in this murder and team up in order to figure out who actually did it. I think that both of them, in the process, they actually kind of leverage the whole demure, mindful thing in order to help them navigate different aspects of the societal norms in the situation. So they might not be if it serves them to get access to a particular place. They might decide to be if it serves them in a conversation, particularly when it comes to, fanning your face. Oh gosh, I'm overcome as a woman by something that's, something that they probably caused intentionally. But I think because they're doing that very intentionally, it ultimately does fall into the not very demure, not very mindful category, because they also, on the mindful side, do many a thing that does not consider necessarily the consequences and outward fallout of what would happen if they were to do that. I like the series, it's very queer. All of the couples in each of the books are same-sex couples, so if you're looking for a queer fantasy steampunk situation, I would definitely recommend checking it out. The last book on my list is Lessons in Chemistry. I think that this is a book that's a very common recommendation on BookTube and Goodreads and BookTok. And I debated, I guess, a little bit on whether or not I would put this in the very mindful, very demure category or not, because I think it has a lot of interesting contrasts in that space. But as a content warning, it includes multiple instances of sexual assault. So if that's not for you, I would not recommend reading it. The book is about a woman named Elizabeth Zott. She has been kicked out of her doctorate program because she was assaulted by her advisor and refused to apologize to him because she pulled a knife on him in the process. She ends up working as a lab tech at another research facility where she meets her husband, and for reasons that would fully spoil the book, ends up being the host of a cooking show on cable. The point of the show is very like Food Network Homemaker, where the audience is stay-at-home moms, generally, who are trying to cook for the kids, cook for the husband, are in very traditional heteronormative situations. And she ends up turning it into a show where women can learn about the biochemistry behind the things that they are cooking, as well as their thoughts on what society thinks that women can or cannot do. Interestingly, I think she says all of these things not necessarily intending to be empowering or whatever, but that is the effect that she has. Very early on, they are giving her cue cards for the things that she's supposed to say, and she actively decides to go off script. So I think that she would definitely fit into the very not mindful, very not demure in that setting. At the same time, when she meets her husband is another researcher at this institution, he assumes that she is a secretary, and she does not correct him. So within the academic setting, there are many instances where I think she does assume that kind of very mindful, very demure approach, because she knows that she already has a bit of a reputation for rocking the boat, if that's what you want to call what happened to her, which is what these men do. So she doesn't necessarily want to make more of a name for her in this space, because she really wants to pursue scientific research, and she knows that she won't be able to if she rocks the boat too much. And as someone who's in academia, this book is set in the 1960s, so that is not how academia is now. I can definitely understand why she does some of the things that she does that I would call demure and mindful, because there are definitely still some norms in academia that I think align with how she decides to make decisions in that space. So those are my 5 recommendations. Again, I would love to hear about books that you think fit into this category down below. I've included links to all of the books in the description if you want to check them out, or you can get them from your local library, which is how I get basically all of my books. And otherwise, I'll see you on the next one.